Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the 401 Access Denied podcast. I'm the host of the episode, Joe Carson, Chief Security Scientist and Advisory CISO at Delinea. And it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm really excited. This is something that I've been really, it's a topic that's a passion of mine. It's something that has been helping me through my career for many years. And I've got an amazing guest on the show. I've been had the pleasure to meet in person recently and to really get to know for me, it's something that is really an important part of the industry. So, welcome to the show, Bill. Do you want to give the audience background about who you are, what you do, and some of the kind of fun things that you get up in the industry?
Well, I've been running No Starch. I started No Starch Press in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
I've been after having been fired from 3 previous book publishing companies, which I'm sort of proud of. I was fired for good reason. It's a classic in the book business. You basically have people running these companies who are not business people.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to cover their own ass, they just start firing editors. That happened at one company, and then the person who did that got rid of me. She was fired, and she deserved that. She was a good editor. She was a terrible business person. Another previous company, Osborne McGraw Hill,
Mm-hmm.
I was fired by a guy who he was going around the room punching the chairs, telling me that I needed to see a psychologist, and he just needed to be basically on a drug rehab program. But I won't mention his name. But Coke does strange things to people, is what I learned there. So that was actually the impetus for starting I already had a business plan when I started in '94. That was just I needed a kick out the door, which some of us need to actually take that leap and start a business.
Absolutely.
And then I actually co-founded another company, which is still around as an imprint only, called A Press in 1997. They probably still use my contract, and I was forced out by the board. And that was another good thing that happened to me. It's basically had me focus on my own business. And in many ways, we've eclipsed what they've done over the years by taking over markets, which is what I like to do. So I studied political science as an undergrad. I never intended to be a political scientist. I intended to be a biologist. And to anyone out there, if you're in college or considering going to college, if you take a wrong turn and you have a parent who says, like, wait, you wanted to be a mathematician, why are you taking English? Take English, be a mathematician, do what you love. I loved biology. I did not love political science. But once you get to the point where you're declaring a major, it's a little too late. I didn't actually know what that meant. When they asked me in sophomore year what major I wanted, I said, what do you mean? Major? So I picked the thing. I actually talked to a friend who had a similar experience and just counted up the credits, and I figured, screw you, I'm going to pick this major because I'll be done with it first. That was a mistake. But with that background and interest in science, I was always interested in physics, so I still am. Chemistry, I was a very good biologist. I was not a good political scientist. So I've carried that forward through my editing technical books for years. And I started with, I was in a post-baccalaureate pre-med program after working with my father's wedding gown factory. I wasn't very good at designing wedding gowns. I didn't really understand the business, but I did understand one thing, one takeaway from my father. When I turned to him, I said, these gowns are really ugly. He said to me, they're not for you. But that's a very telling comment from a very successful business person.
Yeah.
Like, when I work on our books, they're not for me. They're for my readers. The thing that's made my book successful, one thing is I reflect what our readers want. I spend my time going to conferences. Unlike any editor in the business, I never meet any. They may be at conferences. I don't know. I mean, I imagine someone's at DEF CON, right? And they're not going to necessarily come up and find me. Some of them will. But it's very rare that I see editors in this business at conferences, actually hanging out with the community. So when I started, so I left that, I just finished that thread. So I ended up in a post-baccalaureate pre-med program. I was on my way to medical school. And this will give you some sense of the way I look at learning in the world. I dropped out of this program the morning before my first organic chemistry test because I basically learned the most interesting parts of organic, which are protein and the importance of protein structure and function. The important part of not the interesting stuff to learn is not studying reaction and memorizing reaction mechanisms. I can look those up. And I said, like, it was the morning before this test. I was like, this is stupid. I'll cram all these reaction mechanisms. I'll forget them at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I'll get an A and learn nothing. I
Mm-hmm.
was learning nothing in my physics class because there was no time. I love to learn,
Mm-hmm.
like many of us. I spent, people ask like what my hobby is, and the first thing I think is like learning is a hobby. I'm
Yep,
always,
absolutely.
whether I'm learning about orchids, which I
Mm-hmm.
appear to have successfully grown at least this week. My Phalaenopsis orchids are budding, or
Mm-hmm.
had to roast coffee, or fix the. I do have to fix this Juro espresso maker that a friend of mine gave to me. But I like old cars.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good at fixing them, but I like to know how they work. So for me, like when I started editing, I used to edit biology, like
Mm-hmm.
acquire biology books, uh, chemistry books, and such. I love to learn. I love to go and talk to
Mm-hmm.
academics and hear what they're doing. I've been reading recently about things that are happening in the brain. I think they called it. Anyway, apparently, when brains can sync up in ways
Mm-hmm.
that we don't understand, there's a lot of stuff. This
Yeah.
was a recent article I read in Scientific American, and that's the kind of stuff that I wake up to. It's like this is exciting. I want to learn more.
Yeah. Sounds like you actually had a couple of events that really kind of got you on the right path and really kind of set you up to follow your passion ultimately. Because I think if sometimes you do need sometimes you do need those external forces to force you in the right path, and
Right,
also sometimes the environment around you. I think that your father did actually one of the most brilliant things is that know your audience as well. Is that it's not necessarily for you. That's a brilliant kind of use of knowledge that really set you on a path. And one of the things for me that I find is that I read a lot of books, and that's one
hmm
of the things that fundamentally, even I have tried to change a little bit in my more kind of adult years. I used to read like manuals of TVs and VCRs and fridges. I was a very technical, and I also tried to have the balance between what I do now is between a little bit of fiction, a little bit of scientific and maths and computer science. So I try to balance it a little bit more now to get a little bit of different aspects. But for me, one of the things I find, and it's which is amazing that I find from No Starch Press is the level of learning that you get from the books because you're really getting it from the people that are really good at putting it into a way that I always find is I come out with so much more knowledge and practical knowledge. It's not just theoretical. It's not just something that is an idea or a methodology. It's really to the point where it's really able to portray something that is sometimes very complex and very requires hands-on to the point where it actually is really such well structured that you come away with a lot of knowledge. And that's one of the things I admire and for the the team that you have that makes that possible. It's impressive to be able to do that in a book format. It's almost as good as some of the interactive lessons you learn from. It's almost like you get to know the people behind the scenes as well, because they do portray a lot of their personality into the books as well, that sometimes you don't find from others. So what's for a lot of the audience listening into to your basically background and your passions as well is what does it take? What's the process that it takes to create a book? Where does the idea come from, and what's your magic formula that you would have to really get it where it structures in such a way that really is aspiring?
So let me start with author voice.
Mhm.
So one thing that I found. So the first time I edited so-called computer books
Mhm.
was in 1990. I was at Osborne McGraw Hill, which was started
Mhm.
by Adam Osborne, although he was long gone. And I edited computer game books, which was pretty cool for people who were interested in gaming history. So I was
Mhm.
calling out, I would call on Will Wright at Maxis. They had about 10 people in the office in Alameda. That was cool. They were building
Mhm.
SimCity. Uh, the Sierra Online games
Mhm.
people. I mean, I worked on this game Falcon. So the guy who
Oh,
wrote it
Falcon,
was,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I wrote this book on Falcon, and
Mhm.
I was everything that I do. I typically plunge myself into it. I also did something on the Sound Blaster sound cards because
Mhm.
people couldn't get their cards working. So I published the book, which I completely
Lots
rewrote.
of driver problems back then. So,
Yeah, well, I did this official book on
yeah,
Sound Blaster sound cards
yeah.
that effectively kept the company open.
Mhm.
It sold 50,000 copies in 6 months. I
Mhm.
rewrote the entire thing, which was basically what I started doing in 1987,
Mhm.
87, when I was editing medical books. I used to rewrite the books, and they would become bestsellers, like in
Mhm.
that field.
Yeah.
but I've rewritten many of our books in the background. I don't put my name on the cover
Hmm.
because I don't think it's like good stage lighting. Like just because someone is doing good lighting doesn't mean you
Hmm.
don't want to see them on. I didn't come for the lighting. I came for the play.
Yep.
So that's part of our work should be to actually engage with the author's work and try to bring
Hmm.
out the author's voice as best we can. And most of our authors are not necessarily writers first. They may love to write, but
Yep.
they almost probably not every author can use an editor, but most authors can use an editor.
Hmm.
The editor's work should take different forms based on what that author needs.
Hmm.
Some authors, great writers, just need some direction. Other authors, great at what they do, just
Hmm.
need a lot more direction. And sometimes they need rewriting. And so
Hmm.
what I've been doing, so over the years, I used to rewrite, I think something like 6 to 8 books a year. In fact, for
Hmm.
early years, books that I did early, I would probably went through everything. I've
Hmm.
had a couple of authors uh, bothered by that, and they'll say like, "It's not my writing; it's your writing." It's like my intention is to show people what works, what readers
Hmm.
want, and set them off on that path. And
Okay.
sometimes that means like a heavy hand to say like, "I can't follow this." So to
Hmm.
your point, like when I did a book on SCSI in 1997, it's
Hmm.
70% my work. I talked with the SCSI 3 committee. I,
Hmm.
I, I rewrote all the SCSI docs literally. So I explained syntax signaling, how it works in the SCSI bus. It was interesting. I
Hmm.
mean, and my first machine at the company was actually a SCSI based machine,
Yeah.
which outlasted a number of my other desktops because SCSI was so great. But the, so I will insert myself into a
Hmm.
book when I feel like it really needs strong direction, because ultimately what I'm thinking of is
Hmm.
the reader. Every book has a
Yeah.
price tag, as I tell my editors all the time.
Hmm.
We're saying to someone, give us $40, $50 and we'll give you useful information.
Hmm.
So I like to think that I've helped to mentor a number of authors who have come back over the years. Michael Lucas, for example, who did
Hmm.
BSD books for me. The first BSD book that he wrote on a Palm Pilot standing behind servers, and as Michael will tell you, it needed a bit of editing,
Okay.
so it got what it needed. But I also made sure to maintain Michael's voice, his
Hmm.
sense of humor. He did a book on OpenBSD with OpenBSD haikus, and he
Hmm.
actually said to me, I thought it was funny, like, "Can I put these in?" I said, "Sure, put them in." But it's fun. He's creative.
Yeah.
But but uh, but other authors can't really find their voice. They don't really know
Hmm.
what to say. They're really
Hmm.
confused.
They
So I think
cannot. I guess they haven't got the practice to find what their style is. What is their kind of, I guess, approach, or kind of what puts their personality into the text. Sometimes I think when sometimes they're writing from other writers that they've seen.
correct.
But if you write enough, I think sometimes you can start seeing a bit of your personality coming into the text. And I think even myself, when I write, I have my own personal style. I like a bit of humor. I like to add, some of my experiences in there as well. Whether it's relevant to the subject or not, but it adds a bit of the personality in there. So it does.
Well, that makes the book much more fun to
Mhm.
read. We
Mhm.
don't. So one thing, and I have a lot of respect for publishers like over the
Mhm.
years that have really built great bodies of works. For example,
Mhm.
publishers of Richard Feynman's work. I think that's Addison Wesley, but
Mhm.
they're
Yep.
very different companies today. John Wiley has a great history of making some excellent books over the
Mhm.
years, but they too have changed because the market has changed. You can see the
Mhm.
changes. They don't have the editorial staff, the editorial direction, but they've built this great corpus of work. O'Reilly used to be lead in all these areas
Mhm.
because they built a lot of the Unix manuals and Unix
Yep.
support, but I think you can see that their direction has changed. They're a learning
Mhm.
company now. They're not a book
Mhm.
publisher first, but we are a book publisher first.
Mhm.
So there, and what I have maintained is and have continued to grow is our effort on to focus on editorial. Always
Mhm.
focus on editorial. I make books.
Yep.
I don't make videos. I don't do I do a podcast with you, but I don't do my
Mhm.
own. I don't make training courses. Maybe
Mhm.
one day we'll do that. Probably we could do it well, but I
Mhm.
also don't want to step into an area unless I think I could do it very well. For
Yeah.
example, like O'Reilly has really stepped into training, and I'm not going to compete with them. They're way
Mhm.
ahead of me when it comes to that. But when it comes to editing books, I know I believe there are editors who are certainly as good as I am, but
Mhm.
I have if I find someone I think is actually impressive, I want to try to hire them.
Mm-hmm.
but most are not connected. But what the editor's job ought to be is to understand like who's the ultimate reader. So
Mm-hmm.
my company is called No Starch Press for a reason, but and you I think of it as no bullshit, but it's but
Mm-hmm.
and what that means is like there used to be these books on the market called super Bibles, which would be these big fat
Yeah,
books containing
I think
nothing.
I do have a few a few of those books in my which are literally just indexes to be honest.
Well, they're just the whole computer book business was built on
Mm.
rewriting documentation,
Yep.
basically to support piracy. That's what it
Mm-hmm.
was built on. I never cared for that. It wasn't interesting to me. So when I was at Osborne McGraw Hill, we have these connections with Microsoft, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
They give you the documentation, then the authors would start writing. Go. They drop the flag and off they go. It was just uninteresting. But really, so they were rewriting documentation, and the people buying it are probably the ones who pirated the software.
Mm-hmm.
But and then you saw companies kind of start leaving the manuals out of the boxes
Yes.
because, because publishers would write the documentation. I'm not in the documentation business. I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to read documentation all day. Reference it, sure.
Yep.
But early on, it was clear to me, even just with a search engine like Alta Vista or
Mm-hmm.
Hasta La Vista, of course, had different functions, but Alta Vista, I could find what I needed. So I've been running Linux for 20 years
Mm-hmm.
or more. And I'm not going to read a manual on running Linux, but what I did appreciate is our book called How Linux Works, for example. You'll see Linux boots and you get all these messages entering runtime this,
Mm-hmm.
runtime that. How is the system built? So I don't need to know how to cut and paste stuff if I'm reading a book. If I get a book on Word or whatever, like fine.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say I decide that I want a book on Microsoft Word. I've used word processors since literally 1987 or 88. I don't need to know how to cut and paste. Authors get tired. So why write 400 pages of stuff that everyone already knows? If you're doing a new Python book,
Mm-hmm.
okay, don't take me through the setup and all the basic stuff. Give me the interesting stuff. So I think we have to look at what kind of where people are today. It's
Mm-hmm.
not like personal computers weren't invented yesterday. We've all had some level of experience. So for
Yes.
each topic, if we're doing a book on malware analysis, like who is the reader? It's like we publish practical malware
Mm-hmm.
analysis, which needs revision. We know it's in process, but maybe
It
one
is a
day.
very good book, but it is a bit dated, yes. But still,
Yeah,
I mean, still, that's the thing is that one of my points is that you're absolutely right. Versus reference manuals, when a new version comes out, that is already kind of it becomes almost incorrect. Versus the likes of the malware analysis, those cookbooks where it really gives you it's the methodology behind it. That's what you're learning. Yes, the versions do change and the examples do change, but it's the methodology. It's the kind of the mindset and the process
Mhm.
which I find those books come across. The examples, yes, are a few years old, but still that mindset. Even when I get into Chris's books as well, which is the Ida books, which are fantastic as well. He did have the revision version 2 come out, but still you can even go through even George's book, the Pentester book.
Penetration testing. Yeah,
Yeah, even
it's a way
that
of thinking.
it's still the versions that were used in that example. It's the mindset and the methodology which comes across, and that's to your point. I think one of the great things you mentioned at the beginning is the process of learning. It's learning how to learn, and that mindset versus yes, I still can go to the examples and kind of go through and follow along,
Mhm.
but I start kind of getting to understanding about where that person's thinking and what's their ideas, and that comes across in the books really well.
Well, the people you just mentioned are all great teachers. I
Mm.
mean, Georgia does a great job of teaching people how to think like a penetration tester. I remember when she was working on the book that one of my production editors. So
Mhm.
so there's the acquisitions, developmental editing. That's the first stage,
Mhm.
then into production. And she said, I feel like I'm actually learning how to do penetration testing.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with practical malware analysis. The same thing with Chris Eagle's
Mhm.
books and many of her others. I could
Mhm.
keep going down the
Yeah.
line. Eric Mathis, who publishes Python Crash Course, used to teach computer science to high school students.
Mhm.
It's the best-selling textbook in the world by far. It outsells everything. I mean, it's kind of amazing to me that I've never seen a book sell as well as that book in my
Mhm.
entire career. But these are great teachers. So
Mhm.
part of what makes someone a great teacher is like so Richard Feynman is a great model that I've
Mhm.
always thought about. Feynman would basically expand or contract the discussion based on what he thought was important.
Mhm.
So we don't need to go down this path, but let's focus on what's actually like when you take a class, you might retain 5 or 10% of what was presented to you.
Hmm.
So why don't we think about like what that's going to be and give some support level of supporting information, but what do you take away from this? I want people to learn from our books.
Hmm.
You should give, if a book costs you $50, you should get $500 worth of value.
Yep.
And with some of these training classes, I know with practical malware analysis, I remember someone saying to me, "Oh yeah, this is much better than the Mandiant FireEye course, and our books cost like $50, and that was $2,500." And I
Yep.
see the prices on this stuff. We, I, in the book business, we don't routinely charge
Hmm.
$2,000 for a book. I try to sell volume. I want people to actually be able to learn. I want lots of people to be able to learn from it. I want them.
Hmm.
One of the things that I find most rewarding is when someone says, "Oh my God, I love this book," and they're like when I go to a show and people are picking it up and they
Hmm.
basically are selling books to their friends. So why are they selling it? Because it's like it's a book that made a difference for them. Serious
Yep.
Cryptography, which is the last book that I actually edited in detail.
Hmm.
I spent an hour on each page because that's my gift. I kind of got tired of people talking about it's an HMAC, it's secure, it's whatever. It's like no, and then you ask them, and then the discussion would stop
Hmm.
because people couldn't explain it. So I want people to come away if they want to learn with an
Hmm.
understanding of how cryptography actually works without going too deep into the math, which basically puts you off into the deep end where it's like
Yes. The
cryptography is
probability side of things, which gets a bit a bit challenging. So,
it's not what most people need. It's
yeah.
not that there isn't reason to learn it, but if you're just trying to understand this, you can implement it,
Hmm.
or just understand what decisions or why you shouldn't implement it. That's what I intended to do there, and that book really served the purpose.
Hmm.
I published the TCP/IP guide, I think, in 2003 or 2005, and it covered IPv6 throughout, and
Hmm.
and still today, like I mean, it's a massive tome. People
Yeah.
won't do it. So you had Stevens TCP/IP Illustrated on the market. Oh, sorry.
Mhm.
Someone is apparently doing construction next to me. Hopefully, you can't
Not a
hear
not a problem.
it. That's interesting. But anyway, uh, Stevens TCP/IP Illustrated is not
Mhm.
really illustrated, and it reads like a white paper. I don't
Mhm.
mind reading white papers. I don't mind reading research papers, but the sorry, I'm being distracted by hammering noises. Anyway.
No problem.
So
I always have the usually when myself and Jeremy were doing other recordings. My problem here, in because I'm based in Estonia, is usually during the day I've got seagulls like flying by, and
anyway,
sometimes they get into a big battle outside. So Jeremy's always having fun having to edit out the seagulls in the background.
yeah, I know this. Anyway, never mind that.
So,
Okay, so back to the topic at hand. So when I look at books, I start with like, who is this for? So
mhm,
I want our books to what I do is try to mirror what our readers want and make
mhm,
sure that when I offer direction, it's like this is what our readers are looking for. When they
mhm,
pick up the book, when people come to one of my books, and it's like they should know that what the way it's packaged and the promise
mhm,
is what is going to be delivered. So you should
mhm,
be able to understand the information, know that it's been checked, that it's clear. When
mhm,
I my instruction to my editors and my authors always is, if something is to the editors, if something is unclear, try to puzzle through it and figure out how you can make your way through it effortlessly.
mhm.
And when your mind starts to wander, cut.
Yeah.
Because how many times have you read a book? It's like blah 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 blah, page after page of nonsense. Give me the meat. I remember
Yes.
that with networking books. Like, great, I don't need those 600 pages. Can you? So I mentioned earlier that authors get tired. So skip that part and start with the
Mhm.
interesting part, and then give me the 400 pages that you wouldn't have written because you
That's
were tired
that's
of writing the basic stuff.
that is always the most difficult part. So anytime I've written anything, I'm the type of person that I will write and write and write and write, and I will just do a brain dump. And my always difficult part is, and that's where I think an editor and copywriters really come in, and they really make the big difference, is because that's where you have the challenge about, to your point, is what to cut, how to get it down to the very basics, where you're able to still get the information that you're looking to get across,
Hmm.
but in less words. So that was always my challenge, is knowing what to cut, and having those conversations was always, it's about how to keep it in, but keeping the same knowledge and the same, the same, let's say, learning what you're trying to achieve. Do you find cutting the most difficult part, or is that something that you
Putting
become natural?
cutting for me probably has become pretty easy, but I look at each. each book has a story.
Hmm.
Like these are just because they're technical, but it doesn't mean they don't have a story. There's a
Yep.
story. Books are read, I think, often about the form of the physical book.
Hmm.
We read them we read things in sequence. We read down the
Yes.
page and through the book. But and people who a lot of most of our readers have some academic background,
Hmm.
and generally they like to learn. So we're trained in universities, colleges, like read the chapters,
Hmm.
and then we're trained to annotate them, and we're not comfortable necessarily skipping stuff.
Hmm.
So, and a lot of times the stuff you want to skip is like all this filler that's stuck in there that you just don't really need.
Hmm.
So make sure that things don't interfere with the flow of the story. So
Okay.
where's the person trying to go? If you're trying to understand how to analyze malware in a sandbox, like let's
Hmm.
keep focused on the discussion. And you can take it aside and put it in a box. There are little devices you can
Hmm.
do to set something aside. But if you've got page after page of stuff that's not relevant, put it someplace else or take it out and put it in another book.
Hmm.
But you want like don't interfere with the story.
Okay.
I don't like so if you see the design in my books, I spend a lot of
Mhm.
time working on that design.
Okay. The,
I
the
don't have
flow
instructions.
itself. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't have instructions for how to read the book. I don't have 10 different fonts. And
Hmm.
this is again, I had a great admiration for O'Reilly's work, and we worked with them for 14
Hmm.
years. They were doing our sales and distribution, but I never understood why you had to have instructions on how to read the book.
Yes.
So my books don't. And and I have played with taking monospace fonts out of books entirely, but it's helpful to have it. So
Okay.
sometimes with languages, if you
Hmm.
don't highlight the code in a certain way, it's too hard to read.
Okay.
But think about the reading experience. So I think about that all the time.
Mhm. So let's say once an author comes up and they've kind of an idea and you agree on a thought. How much time I've seen spoke to different authors over the years. We had some great we had Dave Kennedy on the show last year, and we also had Paulino and the IoT hacking guys as well. We're on with Bo Woods. And that's just La Spinoza has been on a few times as well. So what's the process? I've heard different authors have done it in sometimes 3 months, others have taken a year or even 2 years. What's the most common time frame? What do you see is the time and process that it would be from the idea until getting a finalized book?
So each author that you mentioned has had different
Mhm.
experiences,
Yeah.
not experience that I've
Mhm.
modeled going forward. Like with the Metasploit book, they
Yep.
went through one editor who no longer works with us, who just had the book off on the wrong track. I took it
Mhm.
over. They all hated me when I took it over, but I think they liked me in the end because they got a great book.
That book was fantastic. It was really well done. So it was.
So before I took it over, Metasploit is very chatty. So we had
Mhm.
literally like 3 or 4 pages of Metasploit chat. Push the button, and here's all the options. And I'm saying like, why
Mhm.
do I need this? I'll just push the button to show the options.
Mhm.
H.D. Moore is an old friend of mine, and I actually did
Yep.
that as a gift to him because I wanted to make a great book on Metasploit, but I
Mhm.
reworked that entire thing. I did the same thing with practical malware analysis because the
Mhm.
same editor worked on that one, and the same thing where it wasn't moving.
Mhm.
So I've changed. I'm working to continue to change our editorial process. It should take reasonably 8 to 10 months is what
Mhm.
I don't rush our books. It's generally a comfortable amount of time for people to write their books. It
Mhm.
could take a year. Uh, Someone writing a book in 3 months makes me very nervous
Mhm.
because it means that there's not enough time to think. But I have many instances in the past where I had books taking years because an editor wasn't actually working with. They would just wait, and
Mhm.
authors often need a schedule. Like, what should I work toward? Oh, just send it in whenever. Okay, I'll send you the second chapter here. So we want some kind
Mhm.
of schedule that the author agrees on. Authors set their own schedules with us, but we want some kind of schedule, right?
Okay.
So what I'm doing now is when before we sign an author, I get on a call with an author. I want to understand what their motivation is, what kind of book they're writing.
Mhm.
I tell authors too that you should, to my mind, be able to turn the pages of the book in your mind so you can get a
Mhm.
feel for what I'm making a physical thing. Yeah, you can buy it
Mhm.
electronically, but I can't stand reading these books electronically. I can't figure out where they
Yeah.
are. But what is it that makes us actually love a book? This packet of
Mhm.
information, like collected information. I can pick it up. I can figure out that what I was looking for is somewhere right over here, and you grab a button.
Hmm.
It's about 2/3 of the way in. You can find it.
Hmm.
Also, there's a lot to be said for thinking about just the way pages look, like the different page setup.
Hmm.
The books are very visual. I remember when I went back 35 years later to look at my
Hmm.
developmental biology books. I remembered actually some of the notes that I took and the images on the page. So
Hmm.
there's a lot to be said for the physical form. But our, in the past, our editors did not work on schedule and would just
Hmm.
basically. There's I would say to any author listening in, your editor should do more than just cheerlead.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, too many of the editors in this business will be like, I would say, "Oh, how'd you like your editor? Oh, they were great. What did they do? Oh, they would call me up and say, great job. They were great,
Hmm.
really rah, rah, rah. I mean, I am very direct. And if I think it needs work,
Hmm.
I'll tell you. And if it's
Yeah.
great, I'll tell you. But my goal is to make the book great. Same with our
Hmm.
editors. But a cheerleader, it's like, yeah, great job. Great. Oh, you're doing a great job. Just keep
Uh,
running over that cliff. You'll be down in 10 minutes when you hit the
uh,
ground flat.
you're so absolutely right. It does take so you need somebody who's a critic that will basically tell you how it is and give you the kind of their if you get somebody who's really good at making sure you put it into that story format. That was one of the things I was good at putting the text, but putting it into this getting it where the and also putting stories. So
Mhm,
but individual stories. And I
mhm.
think the important part that I find with working with editors was they were able to make the stories flow much better and put them
Sure.
in a
Yeah.
structure that means that one will come after the other. Others I've worked with, yeah, I don't need when I'm writing something. One of the things also editors who take they take out my personality from the text and just make it basically just almost like that reference manual or that basically computerized approach, and it
Mhm,
really loses the personality. And sometimes I find I struggle with those. So absolutely, to getting to a point is you need somebody who's going to tell you how it is and how to make sure that you're still connecting with the audience and that story flows. It's so important because that's what makes if there's a lot of books where I've read I just went through from start till finish. And to your point, one of the things I do as well is I've got my little sticky notes that I basically take notes and references through each page that I
mhm,
want to go back and I want to practice something
mhm,
because a lot of the books also have a lot of practical examples that I want to go and I want to get out my oscilloscope and I want to connect it to a piece of hardware and start turning off the electricity accidentally or burning. I was talking about Paulino before, how many times I've soldered my fingers and burnt my fingers or end up in the dark. Those are the things you really want is them to be something that you go over multiple times, and also the storytelling pack. It means that you will go through it quite fast. But one of the things that you mentioned, one what I do quite often though, and I think it's one of the things we've discussed before, is I sometimes get the digital versions first.
mhm,
And one thing that I've got to the approach is that yes, I get the digital versions because I travel quite often, and
mhm,
it's I will carry one book with me, but I don't want to have the many books. So I'll still have the digital versions as easy access and easy reference, and I'll
mhm,
sometimes take notes as well. But if I find the book is really good, I actually go back and I buy the physical copy. Because for me, I think it's the right thing to do. For, to one is to reward the authors as well as that you really appreciate the value that they put into it as well.
mhm.
And I think also sometimes it's even the book as well. Just there's nothing like just having a good book in your hands. And I think one thing that I have to applaud as well is the quality of the books and just the feel of the books also is much different from others. So that's one thing as I find as well. No Starch has done a great thing, in the quality side as well.
So I know a lot about the book business, including book production and manufacturing.
Hmm.
So I select the paper that I normally use
Hmm.
when I can get it. We haven't been using it because they keep raising it's prohibitively expensive. But
Okay.
there was a paper that I used for years called 60-pound Finch opaque. I mean,
Hmm.
I actually care a lot about papers. So we have a paper that's comparable.
Hmm.
And when you look at papers, you think there's something called calendaring, which is basically a
Hmm.
measure of how smooth it is, how thick it is, how opaque it is. So I don't like to see show through. Show through really bothers me, as in I don't want
Yeah.
to look at one page and be able to read the one behind it. So I'm
Yes.
very careful about readability. I don't want super bright white papers because I don't like glare. I
Hmm.
want I want a comfortable. I don't want ivory papers because they get too dark. I
Hmm.
want papers that are easy, that feel good or easy to read, give you. And I also use lay flat, generally, but not always, lay
Hmm.
flat bindings. Lay flat bindings can cost an additional 10% of manufacturing costs, which
Well,
is not insignificant. But it's it's with these lay flat bindings, the cover actually
hmm.
stands away from the spine, so
Hmm.
the spine doesn't crack because it uses a flexible glue. The cover
Hmm.
doesn't crack, and the book lays flat.
Yeah.
And
Because sometimes I think one of the things you get is sometimes you get a book where you have to stretch it open in order to be able to see the end of the page,
right,
and it's one of the things I found is that it's so much easier and you don't have to do that stretching. It actually it's a book that actually it's a readable book. That's that ultimately comes down to, and I think one of the things you mentioned, all not having to see through and the quality of paper does make a big difference.
well, I also use a thicker cover paper. I don't
Hmm.
like the flimsy feeling. I don't
Yeah.
like the wet noodle feel with some of these print on demand books. I use a I use a special finish on the cover. It's called scuff free lay flat matte.
Hmm.
So it's a matte, a plastic laminate cover with an aqueous coating that gives it a this kind of smooth feel, which
Hmm.
only one person has hated, but maybe others. Like some people just can't deal with they just think it feels too
I,
slippery.
yeah, I like the matte. I like that texture as well, the feel as well of the from the cover. It is very different from other books, but it's actually it also makes it very unique because I don't think it's something that's not commonly used
No, it
in a lot
costs
of books.
extra.
Yeah.
All those things cost extra,
Hmm.
and people, this is unfortunately, I think what's happened with the business with larger publishers or publishers with a larger
Hmm.
list is that they're not seeing the sell through on books. They're not seeing the kind of sales volume, so they're just making more of them.
Hmm.
So you have one company on the in the business pact. They just seem I like to call them packets of paper without the
Yeah.
e. But what I see, and I'm not shy about saying this, is that they suck up a lot of authors who do a lot of hard work for them, and then they sell 150 copies, and I mean I'm amazed at how poorly some of these books sell, and
Hmm.
they just put people on this crash schedule, and they put this out with print on demand. So
Hmm.
I think that you see the result of print on demand on the market where it's really easy for everyone to be a publisher
Hmm.
and just make stuff. I
Yeah.
can use print on demand too. I can print 5 copies and say, hey, I published your book,
Hmm.
but I don't do that. So the other thing is I print generally offset. I
Hmm.
print 5,000 copies at a time, not 50, not
Hmm.
100. And that means we have to be very careful about not growing too much inventory and really doing realistic inventory projections. What you get in the end is a really nicely printed book
Yep.
using wet ink on real presses,
Hmm.
which my competitors generally don't do. And for certain books, throwaway things, maybe it doesn't matter. But for,
Hmm.
practical malware analysis, that book is relevant and still selling strongly. It needs really
Hmm.
revision now.
Yep.
Hacking the Art of Exploitation.
Yep.
That book was last released in 2008. It's still usually in our top 10.
Hmm.
Linux Command Line, which is free online, and I've sold
Linux Command Line is fantastic, and even I think it's the hackers. What was the handbook one? Which one is it?
Hardware Hacker's Handbook.
Hardware Hackers Handbook is also great as well.
Those guys
There's
are amazing. I mean, very dense.
mhm.
But yeah, you were mentioning hardware attacks. Like you want to learn about side channel attacks? Talk to
That's
those
yeah. That's it was a Jasper, isn't it? Is it Jasper? Jasper?
Jasper, yeah, yeah,
Jasper? Yeah.
Jasper and
Yeah.
Colin wrote Chip Whisper. I mean, these guys are great. That's a very. I edited 3 chapters
Mhm.
in the book, and I just couldn't get. It was really dense, really interesting.
It was
Side,
very, it did get I mean it did get very technical towards the end when you're getting into the side channels and basically the static and but some of those methods of brushing over and the balls and the processors all it was really get into a lot of technical even for me it was I do quite a bit of hardware hacking but it got to the point where it was over my head but still at the point where I was still learning it wasn't
oh
too
yeah,
over my head. I can understand it, but I don't think I could get to the point where I could reproduce some of the stuff that they were doing
hmm,
myself. I think that's the difference. Where I think in that book, yes, it got to the point where even the equipment that I had,
right.
I got to the point where I could follow along, but some of the equipment you would need to go much further and stuff. But it was still fantastic to learn about some of those techniques.
Well, sometimes there was a book that I his name Ben. I can't remember Ben's last name, but
Hmm.
he built his own electron microscope. Ben,
Oh, did he do the electronic for the kids book? Was that the
no,
Ben?
no, no. That's
Oh,
Oyvind.
Oh yeah.
I just can't remember Ben's last name right now, but basically, he has done some amazing, high level,
Mm-hmm.
very complex hardware projects.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, I wouldn't build my own electron microscope, but I like to know how an electron microscope would be built. So, Bunny's hacking the Xbox, for example. I've never actually hacked an Xbox. I've never like taken it apart, but I read through his entire process, how he
Mm-hmm.
did it, and I understand how you take apart hardware. So
Yeah.
I read to learn, and I
No,
don't necessarily have to
absolutely.
do it. I mean, in reading the hardware hacking handbook, like I
Mm-hmm.
understand how voltage attacks work and how you read
Yeah.
stuff, but I'm not going to set up an oscilloscope and take those measurements.
Practice. So I'm the one. Yeah, I did my oscilloscope sitting in the background. Finally, I've moved to the office, so I've got a bit more space to do it because it does take a lot of space. But it is something that you kind of learn. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, who does the designs for the covers, because that's always interesting as well, because the design, the graphics side of things. So where does the cover design come from? Is that something, because I don't think it, I'm not sure the authors will come up with their own designers, or do they sometimes, or is it something that you do
Very,
yourselves?
very rarely. So I typically art direct the covers, but that, as in, like, the ideas will come. Sometimes I listen to an author and I come up with some crazy idea and it actually works. That happened numerous times.
Hmm.
So I will typically direct them, but I'm not the illustrator. So I have
Okay.
a few illustrators that I go to. I'm working on one now. I think it's going to be pretty cool. We're doing a book on Black Hat Bash, and the cover
Oh,
concept
okay.
is this
Hmm.
shadowy figure with a shell, and it looks cool. And I have
Hmm.
one of my illustrators does my death metal shirts. I'm wearing one of them now.
Okay.
Turns out he's a death metal artist.
Hmm.
So and then we have a woman, Gina, who's done a lot of illustration.
Hmm.
Should we work together on kind of coming up with the cover concept? I will. I'm trying to come up still with a process where
Hmm.
I kind of work with the authors to get them to understand that I want a basic concept, but people are
Hmm.
trained to stick in all this technical detail, and I just keep stripping it out. And the best testament to the fact that, like, we just want something that looks right is
Hmm.
Python Crash Course, which has a Python, which Python is
Yep.
based on Monty Python, but this is a Python snake sitting on a rocket engine.
Yep.
Like,
Yep. I
nothing
remember that
about
one.
Python programming. Yet it is the best selling tech book in the world. So
Yep.
when someone says, we need this, we have to put a bunch of code, it's like, just take it out.
I
Like,
had I had so much fun with my son actually doing the Python Crash course, because it was the one with the Space Invader game in it. Was that one with it was Python
there might,
Crash course that
well,
had
the
I think it was the
mission
Space Invader game.
could be
It had
Mission Python,
yeah.
I
Oh,
think.
okay. So we
No,
basically
well, there's Python for kids, there's Python Crash Course.
it might
Anyway,
have been I can't remember which one it was, but I know they came with a practical game that you basically go through. And you slowly create the different aspects of the
levels,
game, levels, and
that might
and
be
I had so much
anyway.
fun with my son doing it, and we also changed some of the graphics and images to be much more comical as well. But that's the great thing as well. Those books. Any one of the things I find as well is that no matter what level you're on as well yourself personally, you will get
Mhm.
value as well. Is that you don't have to be an expert. You can come along with basically either a low level of knowledge introductory, or you
Mhm.
can still be an expert,
Mhm.
and you'll still get value from it because you're getting not just this textbook basically manual thing. You're getting to the point where you're getting that person's
Right.
own experience coming through, and that does make a big difference as well.
I like to think about our books as,
Mm.
it's like, I've thought about this for years. It's like you're reading over the shoulder of someone that you respect, or it's like that person is in the book. It's
Yeah.
hard to get there, and it takes a lot of work.
Hmm.
It's much easier to not edit. I think
Yeah.
I think it. I might be misquoting it, but Mark Twain, I think, said something like, "I uh, I don't know. It's essentially it's like I would have written a shorter book, but I didn't have enough time, or
Yeah.
something like that." So
So,
that's probably a total misquote.
how many people's involved in the whole process? So you've an editor, you have an author, an illustrator. What's the team behind? What typically is involved?
So we work. There's a certain level of collaboration, certain
Hmm.
level of independent work. So I direct together with a managing editor the editorial program, and our
Hmm.
managing editor now is Jill Franklin, who ran Linux Journal for 20
Oh
years.
yeah, yeah, yep.
And Jill has great experience, and generally we're in sync, and
Hmm.
I think that's been a great change for the company. So we start with kind of reviewing projects. Most of our projects are coming in over the transom. People finding us. I love this book. I'd love to publish
Hmm.
with you. But one reason I go to conferences is to meet people who might not otherwise meet me and talk with them and try to
Hmm.
get them to work with my company and explain that process. So the whole process should be focused on mentoring authors and making sure that we take a good book and make it great.
Hmm.
So it starts at that level. We then assign the book to an editor whose job it is to work with the author on schedule and review chapters as they come in.
Hmm.
After so once chapters look clean enough and are on track, and I'm doing more to check on that to make sure that they are on
Hmm.
track, they go to production where we have a team that basically, if it's not a LaTeX book where it's basically composed, we're putting it into pages using InDesign
Hmm.
and making sure that the chapters are proofread, that they get copy edited and proofread both. So we have a production editor who basically oversees that process,
Okay.
pulls together a team of a copy editor, a proofreader, maybe a layout person, depends,
Hmm.
and they're overseeing to make sure that the chapters are on track. This is just old school publishing, and
Hmm.
unfortunately, not what every company has. But I structure the business just as there's a way to do book publishing right to my mind,
Hmm.
and I use a fairly
Hmm.
I use basic process. I have a team of sales and marketing people who work together with the authors and with Penguin Random House, which is our distributor, to
Hmm.
make sure that we're in sync. So we're cataloging books way early and trying to
Hmm.
figure out the basic plan so that we can get advance orders from the book business. So scheduling becomes important at a certain point. We have people generating not just marketing copy, but different
Hmm.
promotions or flyers and stuff like that. So it's a whole kind of collaborative process, with the ultimate goal being I want to make good books great and I want to maximize the sales as much as possible. So I have one
Hmm.
person dedicated to foreign rights sales. So she's
Hmm.
going around and just getting rights deals, and she
Hmm.
does an amazing job of it. And that can be very lucrative for authors. This is the book business. It's not as
Yeah.
lucrative as a weekend training if you're a star,
Hmm.
and I recognize that. But she will easily get significant deals from
Hmm.
foreign rights translation partners, and authors get 50% of that. So that's one way we can
Okay.
help authors to bring in some real money. And I
Hmm.
have my royalty structure is flat. So we it's a cafeteria plan. People
Hmm.
choose the options: 10%, 12%, 15%. Pick one. And
Hmm.
authors often have no idea how to evaluate this. And they'll look at something and they'll say, "Oh, this company is better. They'll pay me 17%." Well, 17% of zero is zero, and
Yes.
but so numbers lie.
Hmm.
So I say to any author listening, ask the hard questions. Well, how is this structured? What happens? And I don't cut royalties for different types of sales.
Hmm.
There are contracts out there where they cut a royalty in half for direct sale. Why?
Hmm.
I pay the same royalty level. They take the author's royalty and give them that percentage of a foreign rights deal. I get
Hmm.
50%. And I added this up, and it's like the difference is very significant. But
Hmm.
but unfortunately, authors are too eager to just sign something because someone offered them a contract.
Yeah.
And I say to every author, including ones that want to work with us, take your time, read through the contract, ask the hard
Hmm.
questions before you sign the contract. Because once
Yeah.
you sign the contract, if you sign with another publisher, I can't even talk to you about that
Hmm.
contract because it's called meddling.
Yeah.
So I've had people come to us, I'm frustrated with this company. I'd like to talk with No Starch. I can't even explore that.
Hmm.
So take your time. Don't give away
Yeah.
your product because it's
And
the product
yeah.
of your work.
And talk to other authors as well who who you aspire with, and get their feedback, as well. And sometimes even depends, they might direct you in the right kind of path, but also they will give their own experience about how they would do it differently as well in the future, for sure. So definitely, I always recommend authors to make sure you talk to others, who went with different publishers, and just to get their honest feedback,
Right.
and they will definitely make sure that kind of what you're getting into as well.
And ask those and turn those into questions because each
Hmm.
person has one person's experience. Someone might love it, someone might hate it, but
Hmm.
like go to the person that you're working with. Who will be my editor? What can I expect from your marketing
Hmm.
people? Can I talk to your marketing people? What's the plan here?
Hmm.
Like ask those questions because ultimately you're trading off some percentage of revenue.
Hmm.
It's not like if you get 15%, the publisher doesn't pocket 85%. It
Yeah.
doesn't work like that. But ultimately you're trading off something for service. This is a
Hmm.
service business. So if you're
Yeah.
hiring any service, ask the hard questions before you sign the contract.
So, Bill, it has been honestly a pleasure, and fantastic listening to you in the background. And I have to say is that you are doing such an amazing work in the industry, because the quality of the books, the learning. even for myself, it actually has, I'm always looking for things that really push me to the next level and to what continuously learn. And I've learned so much from the books that your company and you've kind of brought to the industry, and really helped, I think, take some authors who are good and make them great, and really kind of take along that process. So I'm hopefully get to catch up with you again, probably at DEF CON or a Black Hat. I guess will be the next opportunity. Any final words that you would like to leave the audience? Kind of, what would if they have an idea, what would you say would be the next step if they've got something they're really passionate about and they really kind of have experience and a story to tell? What would be the first step or first thing that you would recommend?
Use don't email me directly because I might not see your email for 3 years, but email editors@nostarch.com. That routes to multiple people,
Hmm.
and with your idea. I mean, ideally, there's a page on our site, a Write for Us page, which I wrote.
Hmm.
That's what I'm looking for. I think every book needs a good plan, and
Hmm.
I can only do so much with an idea. And the problem with just the idea is like you have one idea, I have another, and
Hmm.
you end up writing this book based on that idea. And I say like I can't publish this,
Hmm.
so I really want to see a proposal. I want to make sure because that practical malware analysis had an amazing proposal,
Hmm.
and that we use that as a model. We'll send
Hmm.
you the proposal, use it as a model. It's going to help any author to plan their work because
Hmm.
it's writing a book is probably twice the amount of work or three times what you think
Hmm.
it will be. It should be an
Yep.
enjoyable process, but
Yep.
you need that plan. So I encourage people always to write the plan. Don't just
Okay.
and if you're don't be offended if like we don't just sign you based on the idea because signing a book that's haphazard means that we've got a lot of discussions to go
Hmm.
through and a lot of frustration. And I need the plan, and every author
Hmm.
should have that plan. But chat, find me at a conference or
Hmm.
you can reach out to me. I'm happy to mentor, even if you don't publish with me. That's okay. Or you're just like you want to try it on your own. All right, I'll
Hmm.
give you some advice. I'm not going to give you weeks worth of advice, but I'll give you suggestions. Try this, and here's the challenge: ask the hard questions. Think for yourself. Like dig in. Don't just take one person's opinion. They tell you we're amazing. Don't assume we're amazing.
Hmm.
Maybe we're a terrible fit, but ask those questions before you sign. Do your own do due
Hmm.
diligence. This is your baby. So,
Yep.
if someone's going to have you write something for 8 to 10 months and sell 100 copies. I mean, yeah, maybe you don't care about the money, but maybe you want to do a little digging. If you want
Hmm.
to talk with us, talk with Wiley, talk with Pearson, talk with whatever. Just check out the options.
Yep.
You want to make sure to not alienate companies, but like companies don't they like to hear that if it's a simultaneous submission that's the
Hmm.
case. At least I do, so we can know. But this I think be upfront about that because ultimately you're dealing with a person on the other end, so
Yep.
that person is going to work with you at some level. Ask for sample editing work. There's no I
Hmm.
do it. Ask for a
Yep.
sample. Tell me your marketing plan because you're
Hmm.
trading off. You're basically buying that. This is a service
Yep.
business, and publishers need to do a better job of servicing authors. It's a service business, so keep in mind that you're buying something. You're buying the work of it because you can
Hmm.
go and take it to create space. You can take your project, but they'll monetize every piece. So what do you
Hmm.
need? What do you want? If you don't want editing, then there's no value there. And so what else can this publisher do?
Hmm.
And make us squirm a little bit. It's okay. I have nothing to hide. I'll tell you how we do our sales and distribution. I'll tell you
Hmm.
where we're weak. I'll tell you where we're strong. I'll tell you why books work. I'll tell you why they don't work. I'll suggest ways that you can approach
Hmm.
your work. Use AI tools, ChatGPT, if it's still around by the time this goes out. Probably it is. Like, use it to mentor yourself. Have us mentor you. Listen to what you're. If you respect your editor, listen to the suggestions that they make. I mean,
Hmm.
my goal is always to help authors to make their books better.
Yep.
That's
And
what I've
you
done for my entire career.
and you do that. I absolutely. It's such amazing to. I think that's the lessons learned in your experience and the team that you have. It definitely takes an author and it makes a great author. I can definitely from the many books that I've read through from No Starch
Thank
Press.
you. Yeah, that's
It is a big difference.
this
Bill,
is
it has been amazing having you on. And it's been such a pleasure, and it's always it's a great listening to you and talking with you. And again, many thanks for being an awesome guest on the show. And we'll definitely make sure that all of the links to No Starch and other things. We'll make sure we get into the show notes as well. And really looking forward for the future amazing learning that I will get from yourself and others.
Thank you for having me on the show. It's been great.
It's
I love
absolutely
talking
been a
about
pleasure.
your work.
Look forward to it. So, everyone, this is the 401 Access Denied podcast. And again, I hope this has been very educational for all the aspiring authors out there. Definitely take Bill's wealth of experience and knowledge, and definitely look and make sure that you have a plan and go through it and prepare and ask the hard questions. So look forward to speaking with you again in the future. Everyone, stay safe, take care, and look forward to the next episode and podcast. So take care. Thank you.